Wonderful. It is my pleasure to introduce our panel today. I'd like to start with Nicolas Loeillot. He's a tech entrepreneur in artificial intelligence and especially in computer vision. He spent 15 years in Tokyo growing his startup in this domain and sold the company to Amazon in 2017. He still owns a deep tech incubator in Tokyo, and since 2018, he's Chief Innovation Officer at Groupe Mutuel, a leading health insurance company in Switzerland, where he works on developing predictive models for health risk prevention and coaching. He's also involved in executive programs at EPFL around innovation, health, and cybersecurity, and was recently granted a 4-year mandate as InnoSwiss expert in the AI and biometrics domain. He's going to be our moderator, and you already know our speakers.
Thank you, Irene. Thank you, Burcu and Samuel. That was very interesting. I mean, as the rest of the program today is really fascinating. I will start with a question that I have to ask, otherwise everyone will blame me for not asking this question, is what about data privacy? How do you see the data privacy to evolve in time with the wearables? Today you are making research, so you can have some kind of freedom in collecting using the data. But my question is, how do you see the link of the data privacy for the applications when it will go into the streets or in the hospitals? It's the question for both of you.
Mm-hmm. You should go first.
Samuel, maybe.
Oh.
What is your US experience, and how do you see the evolution of wearables and privacy?
It's a very, very complex question. I don't think we're going to see any very clear answers to it in the immediate term, since we're dealing with new data types all the time, and I think we're also suffering from an evolving legacy of, for want of a better word, cock-ups in the space. The big companies that we entrust our data with keep messing it up. They keep breaching our data. So I think we've gone from a position probably a few years ago where people were probably reasonably willing to share data to now not so much, right? There's been too many breaches. And the question is, how do we actually deal with this? Making data secure in itself is very difficult. It's not like anybody intended to have data breaches, right? People are actively trying to steal that data, which is a massive problem. So we're going to have to go super carefully. I feel like long term, many years from now, we'll be looking at new arbitrators of trust in the system. And I don't want to launch the term blockchain into there. I'm thinking of more companies like Humanity, the kind of companies who are thinking that data ownership should always sit with the person who generated the data in the first place. And the kind of companies are trying to build models around monetizing that data. So then you, as a data generator, you start to. There's a reason for you to be feeding the system, so that's going to help us with the engagement problem. The people providing those services are going to have to build them in a way that is trustable and compliant, so that these data breaches can't happen. So I think we have to move away from where we are right now, with lots of this data being centralized with the likes of Google and Facebook and whoever, to each person's personal data being their own personal property.
Okay, and you, Burcu, with because you're directly collecting words and the life moment of your patient.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we
how do they? Yeah.
Perspective. We say this is your data. It's your own ownership. You can do whatever you want with your data. Actually, what happens is when we introduce the studies to participants, if they accept to participate in the first place, then they're completely fine with sharing all of their data with us. So once they agree to participate, then they let us use all of their data, and for, of course, scientific reasons. We give them a lot of ideas about what they can do. We say, if you think there's a private conversation that you don't want us to hear, please stop the recording. They can do that in the app. Or please write in your diary. We ask them to fill out diaries, very short diaries throughout the day. to show their activities to us. We say if you want us to delete anything, just make a note in your diary. Say delete everything that's between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m. on Saturday, and we will delete immediately and not listen to any of those. And we actually give them all of their data back. We say you can have it all. If you don't want us to process them, then just let us know. So once they agree to participate, they let us use everything. Very, very, very few people said, delete this one conversation, from Saturday. Very few. It's less than 1% even. And this holds for both young, middle-aged, and older adults. One problem we have is, of course, third parties. Because participants, they give us their consent, but people they're having conversations with, they might not always know that they are being recorded. What we tell our participants to tell their friends and family that they are being recorded during these, 4 days or a month or whatever the study design is. So they wear the tool visibly. We even have these big red warning signs on the phone. So we tell them to openly tell this to others around them. But if they're in a bar and if someone at the next table is talking about something that we pick up on, yeah, exactly. So these are some of the.
So I ask this very naive question because I have a less naive question as maybe for Samuel, is what do you think of Neuralink, the Elon Musk and new endeavor? I mean, he succeeded in SpaceX, he succeeded in Tesla, he succeeded in PayPal, he's now going into neuroscience. Will he succeed? What is your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, what's your definition of success, right? So the other things you've listed as in being successful in, yeah, he's made some stuff work and some stuff that's technologically some of the most complicated projects that are happening worldwide right now. So and spectacular in terms of technological success. I'm not sure where he is with his business successes. And I think the same is true for Neuralink, right? That's technologically, it's a brilliant thing they've made. And they're doing some excessive marketing of it, right? Because they've not really done anything that nobody hasn't done before. They've just kind of put it in a nicer box. So in the concept of recording from upward of 1,000 microelectrodes has been happening for, I don't know, 30, 40 years, in primates mostly. And all they've really done is improve the product design, right? The actual fundamental engineering of capturing single unit activity from neurons on microfine wires and sending that to a machine for analysis, that idea in itself is ancient. The one thing I think they've done better than anyone else is compressing that data so you can actually transmit that scale of data to a smartphone. That is a good step forward, but again, it should be viewed as an incremental step forward in that field. It's not as groundbreaking as what he did with SpaceX. Not from where I sit as a conventional neuroscientist in my history. I think the more interesting question is,
you were talking about a plateau for the wearable. Do you see when do you see the plateau for this kind of technology, or do you see that people will agree to put something on their skull? And what is
there's 3 or 4 people you'll be able to find on Google who are kind of already there, right? Bad ideas though. Okay. So yeah, there's the ancient concept, right? If you could record from every neuron in the human brain, then you'd know what it was doing, right? Which you're not going to do. You can't implant that many electrodes. And for me, the question is, what's he really trying to do? What's the end game? What's the value to the person who has this implant? And with something like 1,024 cortical electrodes, there's probably some valid applications in epilepsy. He's talking about, and someone's convinced Elon Musk that what happened in the Matrix is real, and that he's just going to be able to download karate and do it straight away. And that's, I don't believe that for a minute. So I strongly question what he thinks the application of his technology is for. There are clear applications in brain-computer interfaces in epilepsy, neuromodulation, but there's also loads of people in that space already that have been doing it for years. I question whether that's where Elon wants to go. He wants to do something a bit more wacky, and that I don't see a need for it. I don't see the customers for it. So if nobody wants it, it's not going to go anywhere. And he'll end up having to, my guess would be he'll have to license that technology out to people who are going to use it for fairly traditional medical applications.
Okay, so maybe we can consider the other side of the application, which is to be ambient. So there is nothing to wear. It's not a wearable anymore. It's not definitely not in the skull, but it's in our surroundings.
Yep.
Do you consider that as a wearable? And maybe Burcu, do you think it would be much more relevant in your study to put the microphones everywhere in the room, in the cars, and to have a seamless recording of your life?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
I do see that as a more imminent future, right? And I hope maybe we can nip this in the bud, right? Because I do hear those devices being referred to as wearables, which is kind of insane. So let's try and promote the concept of nearables for that. So devices that are in your vicinity that are capturing things about you. So if we can all start talking about nearables, it will make the communication easier. And yeah, those things are already with us, right? So just had a great talk on capturing speech. The microphone is probably one of the oldest sensors in our armory. As is the video camera, and from those there is already so much that we can do. Loads of algorithms coming out of places like MIT for detecting heart rate from video footage, from recapturing audio from video footage. Some of that stuff's really cool. So there's so much information you can get from someone without ever touching them. Again, those are already creeping into our lives. You look at people's things like Bedit, that's a nearable, capturing all that similar information during sleep. And I think for really big traction, that is the better way to go. If you don't have to remember to charge something, things that are permanently powered in your environment, picking up that data, streaming it back to wherever it's being processed, they're potentially much more powerful than wearables. But the flip side of that is, go back to your first question, how do you prevent those nearables capturing data about people who didn't want to have data captured about them? So the data security, I think, for nearables is much more complex. As a casing point, really simple one, right? I did a deployment of a mattress sensor, a bit like Bedit, right? If you've got a patient who's agreed in your consent form to have that data captured, the question came back, well, what about my sleeping partner? They hadn't consented, and you're still capturing that data. So I think the data security issues are more complex with nearables, but I think the future is also a lot brighter for them. 20 years from now, I suspect wearables might have had their day, and we'll be getting all the same information from nearables.
Okay. Burcu, do you think it would help your studies for voice analysis and words analysis to have this streamlined?
Currently, we don't do this. So we ask people to really wear the device, whatever it is, on them and carry it around. We have, for example, one device now, it's called the U-Trail, which collects both audio data, GPS data, and accelerometer data. We've run a huge study on seniors over a month in order to detect their social, cognitive, physical activities, as well as more macro level mobility, for example, in their neighborhood or within the country. But yeah, we haven't used any. There are, of course, a lot of studies on smart homes and everything with seniors, but we haven't done any of that in our lab. But then one question I have is, how much data do we want to collect? Like, I think there should be a limit, because the data becoming bigger and bigger and more complex. I mean, does that add more knowledge or more value into this? What's the stopping point? I mean, live logging is a huge thing in engineering research, I think, right now. But how much do I want to log my life? What am I going to do with all of that information? And some of the information is just really, really trivial. For example, our ear studies show us that what we do throughout the day is really, really boring, trivial stuff. Like, do I want to know about all of that? Probably not. And how do we store all of those big data? How do we convert them into different types of data as the technology advances? What do we do with all of these data? I think these are some conceptual, like theoretical questions and ethical questions that we should answer first before starting to log everything about our lives.
You mentioned the context, and maybe it could be good to capture the context. And while in Japan, I had a demonstration from Toyota. They're making a kind of puppet, and this puppet was equipped with cameras and microphone and was recording everything in the room. And it was engaging in conversations with the elderly. And adapting as well the conversation based on the people. And do you think it would there is future in this kind of conversational device? Yeah.
This is becoming, I think, more and more popular, as I think the level of loneliness is increasing in seniors' lives. In our chair at the University Research Priority Program, Dynamics of Healthy Aging, there is now a European project called Nestor, and there the goal is to create this little device like a chatbot that will live with seniors and, for example, tell them what the weather is like outside, or give them some tips on their diet, on their physical activities. So this tool that will interact with them in everyday life. So I think this idea is becoming more and more common and popular, and there's some research showing that older adults might like this, actually. Yeah, I don't think in terms of social conversations or social interactions and conversations, I don't think this can ever replace a human being to have a real conversation with.
And Samuel, a question for you. How do you see the adoption of wearable for the elderly? So probably with time, we are the future elderly, so we were more adaptive to new technologies. But is there some good experience? Is there some cases which are very promising in terms of the adoption of wearables?
Yeah, there's never one answer to any of these questions, right? So, the way I see it right now is that everything is very use case dependent, and the sort of phrase adoption of wearables just sort of feels like we're trying to broad brush say all old people are somehow for some reason going to want to wear wearables, and they're not. And I think it goes back really nicely to the point that was just made about how much data do we really need to collect. So, if you say to an elderly person, we want to monitor your vital signs for a week, they'll engage in that no problem because they can see an end to it. It's very hard to find people who will say, you know what, I do, and as I mentioned in my talk, right? You're not going to find people who say, I want to wear this device 7 days a week, 365 days a year for the rest of my life. No one wants to engage in that. None of these devices are as comfortable as their manufacturers say they are, right? I mean, they're not clothes, they're made of hard plastics and bits of metal. Yeah. And not many of them are particularly cool, and the battery lives are bad. So there's loads and loads of negativities with them. So you've got to have a sort of time window where you say, let's do this for a week or a month. You might get lucky and get someone to do it for 6 months, but then people are going to really drop off and say they're not interested anymore. And I didn't actually talk about this in my talk, but I think the question of how much data do we need to capture, particularly in the mental health space, is really interesting. We're now talking about, we've got all these monitors for cardiovascular health, which might be you might want to do continuous monitoring for people who might be at risk of having a heart attack, and you're going to send an alert to a paramedic to come and pick them up. When you're talking about someone's progression into dementia, you probably need to collect their heart rate once a week, maybe get their blood pressure once a week. And instead of talking about wearables, you're just talking about at-home health monitoring devices, standard blood pressure cuffs that connect to a smartphone, a finger-based PPG sensor, right, for getting SpO2 and heart rate for a minute or so. Just those little snips of data. And again, it's not trendy to talk about it, right? Because I now no longer get to talk about big data. My data is actually really small. And because the collection time's a minute scale once a week or once a month. And that's the kind of data that would be really useful. And how many people are really engaging with that? Not many, but that's probably the most useful thing to do next in terms of remote patient monitoring, especially over the timescales we talk about. And then another point that comes up with this concept of big data, one, I think we can shrink it a lot, but we're now, probably a year away from all moving away from talking about cloud computing and big data and going back to the edge. So all this stuff's going to get processed on device. It doesn't need to get sent anywhere, which hopefully solves a lot of privacy issues. But to get there, we've got to go through the big data loop of centralizing the data to generate the algorithms that make the predictions that you can then shift back to the edge and deliver outcomes without ever actually sending data anywhere. So we've got to go through the big data loop to generate the knowledge. But I think 10 years down the line, we'll be looking at devices that collect data from a person, provide feedback to that person, and the data never went anywhere, never left that person's smartphone or laptop, whatever it was.
Okay. Quick question on this. I mean, you presented on your slides of very complicated EEG machines and everything. Do you think that there is a shift to consumer grade solutions, maybe like a solution like emotive or news or different things? Yeah.
There's lots of them, right? And I don't want to be too dogmatic, but I probably will be. Irene certainly will expect me to be dogmatic. So you can take a look at every single EEG device manufacturer who dropped a load of channels and made something small and sexy and stuck it on the market, right? And every single one of them has ditched anything that feels like really solid science, and every single one of them has had to start selling a meditation platform, right? Because once you get into low channel counts, that's all you can use it for. And they're also sort of, for me, it gets a bit snake oily. They're kind of peddling, wear this device while you're meditating and you'll see some benefits. And we can't tease apart whether the device gave them any benefit or whether it was just the fact that they were meditating. Because a lot of these devices are just measuring noise. Probably get some angry messages on LinkedIn now. But I've tested nearly all of them, and a lot of them just generate a lot of noise. And you can run a nice meditation algorithm on noise, and you'll get nice meditation. And as a consumer, you're probably quite happy. As a scientist, you're kind of appalled. So yeah.
Okay, that's a dogmatic position.
That was my dogmatic position.
I have a question for you, Burcu, regarding the labeling of the data, because I've been exposed to mood analysis in my past. It's very difficult to assess and to label the data, and there are a lot of bias on the labeling itself of the data set. Are the people happy, sad, and everything? What is the context and everything? How do you manage this critical step?
So what we did was completely trying to be completely objective. So we had no self-report from the participants during the ear sampling. So we tried to just listen to the sounds and try to understand if the participant sounds, if the participant is actually laughing or crying or arguing, yelling, sighing, singing. So we looked at these specific behaviors. So we tried not to interpret anything. And recently we conducted a study where we had both ear data and self-report from the participant throughout the day. So I don't have those data analyzed yet, so I cannot give you any specific findings on this, if the ear coding and the self-report of the participant matches or not. But yes, you're right that the objective, what we can objectively hear from outside might be really different from how the participant is feeling. So when we code for someone as laughing, maybe it's a hysterical laugh. Yeah. So we didn't, for example, code for different types of laughter, which we should, I think, because yes, it will lead to a more richer data, I think. And but I think the best way of doing this is really using a multi-method approach. So not sticking to only objective or manual coding, but also trying to collect different sources of data on the same thing, on mood, so that we merge all the data and try to come up with a bigger picture of the current mood state of the person. Yeah.
I have another tricky question for you, because in your time travel presentation, you talk about the future and the past. And what about the now? The people are living in the now. How do you manage this now, as we were talking about meditation with Samuel? How do you make the difference? How do you monitor this? And do they feel better? Or what is the feedback with the now when they talk in the present tense?
Yeah, we coded for that actually. So we coded for whether the participants were talking about the present activity, the present task, or the present situation. And we found that 55 to 60% of all conversations across all samples are about the current moment. So if they are watching a TV show, they're talking about the TV show. If they're cooking something, they're talking about just that. If they're playing a game, they're talking about that. So it's really 55 to 60%, and again, consistent across all samples. And what is more interesting is, remember the prospective bias in thinking behavior? Well, what we found is exactly the same with thinking behavior for present. So people think about the present around 60% of the time. And they talk about the present, again, 55 to 60% of the time. So for present, it is exactly the same, but there's this flipping effect, completely contrasting effect for past versus future. So it's very interesting. People actually do live in the moment.
That's good news.
Which is a very to be mindful, or mindfulness, to be in the moment, focusing on that current task. It's good, yeah. And old people do this the same way as young people do, and yeah.
Speaking of living in the moment, it's actually time for us to maybe wrap up. So if you have maybe just one last quick question.
I have one last question for Samuel, maybe short answer. What do you think is the key enablers for the wearables in the future? Now, what could be the thing which is making that everyone is using wearables everywhere, all the time and everything? Is it embedded AI? Is it batteries? There is always these kind of things. Yeah,
it's much simpler than that, right? We've got to return value to the people who are wearing the devices.
Excellent.
At the moment, they generate data, and we don't really tell them what it was useful for. And until we give that feedback, we're not going to get massive scale adoption.
Yeah, perfect answer. Excellent.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank all of you for your wonderful contributions. Nicolas, for a wonderful moderation as well, and the preparation. Sam, for your continued insight into wearable technologies, and Burcu, I keep amazing me with your research on speech and language. And thank you very, very much. It's a shame Emmanuel couldn't be with us. For whoever's interested in his work, he actually wrote 2 books. If you'd like to look them up, they're available on the internet. And that would mark the session also of this session too. Please remember that there is the opportunity to network as well, just after we close out here. And thank you so much for participating. And thank you so much again to the speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Irene. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.